This episode contains mature themes, language, and discussions that might not be suitable for all audiences. We believe in open and honest conversations that sometimes involve exploring topics that can be sensitive or challenging. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Shantell Martin, and I'm the host of What's the Point? This is a conversation series dedicated to exploring why artists create art and the forces that influence us. Join me as I sit down with artists and friends to talk about their reasons for doing what they do and why they continue to create.
For me, the point of art is creating your own language.
A lot of times when I shoot, I think of how's this going to look in 10 years?
I don't really think about the individual colors as much as I think about how they play off of each other.
Oh, the point is the journey.
And I start to get a sense of what the painting is going to be like.
Because the point of art could simply be just to make it.
I'm very happy to introduce today's guest, Aja Monet. Aja is a boundary-pushing, Grammy-nominated surrealist blues poet. She first got her start becoming Nuyorican's Poets Cafe Grand Slam champion in 2007 at just the age of 19, making her the youngest Grand Slam champion in the venue's history. Her first collection of poems was nominated for an NAACP Image Award for Poetry, and her first poetry album was Grammy-nominated for Best Spoken Word Poetry Album in 2024. Aja also serves as the artistic creative director for V-Day, a global movement to end violence against women and girls, as well as creating Voices, an audio play amplifying the stories of Black women. Thank you for coming in today. I know that you've been very busy.
Yeah.
You've been traveling a lot.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of your last travels.
Well, I just got back from Belgium, Brussels. Wow. I was there for a short residency with the Afropolitan Festival. It's their last year doing it. Yeah, and then I did something in Paris. The beginning of this year hasn't been that crazy so far because I've tried to try to give more no's and less yeses, or at least just more intentional.
Yeah.
Last year we toured for a lot of the year. Was in Canada, was in Europe, London, Germany, all over, and then some places in the States. And now I'm home, thankfully. You know, I'm really grateful when I have the space to be home. It's always grass is greener on the other side, isn't it?
And is LA home for you?
Yeah, it is for right now. It's the place that I reside. And it feels nice to come back to.
Yeah.
It's a nice place to return to at this phase of my life. Although there are many days that I wish I were not living in the States at this current moment, you know.
I feel like I can relate on many different levels. So you said we were touring. Like, who was touring?
At this iteration of work that I'm doing, it's promoting an album. So I put out an album in 2023, and it was called When the Poems Do What They Do. And so it's a full band. It's hard to do at this time, you know, just in terms of, in general, traveling, but being a band leader and taking care of and being responsible for other humans while traveling is a lot of work. Then as a woman, as a Black woman, as a poet, there's so many layers and dimensions and facets of what makes it beautiful and profound, and also sometimes very challenging and overwhelming. But all in all, you know, I'm really extremely grateful for every day, every chance, every opportunity we get to perform and share and express and be in conversation with others who appreciate and value the work.
Yeah. So, you know, being a poet, it's something we usually think as quite a solo endeavor. So having a band, like, how was that process of being like, okay, I'm going to have a band, and then finding the people that could, you know, be a good fit for you and then travel with you and everything in between?
Yeah, it's a challenge. You know, I think for the most part, I've been very lucky and blessed and fortunate to, before I did the album, as a solo poet, you know, so to speak, I guess I traveled a lot and I always performed. You're often getting invited to perform to be a part of other people's projects. So rarely do you get, you know, does a poet get to be the person that directs, curates, hosts, facilitates the vision that they have. Oftentimes you're brought in to be a part of someone else's project. So there are many times when I've been featured on other musicians' albums or stage performances, etc. But this was the first time I was able to fully direct and curate my own album and decide what musicians I wanted to work with and really take the lead. And then from there, we made the album, but that was during lockdown. And there was still a lot more to figure out once things started to open back up, because a lot of the musicians I worked with were fully touring musicians on their own, and they're incredible, talented people in their own right. So I started to kind of, just out of sheer nature of community and collaboration, be in conversation with other musicians that I really admired and looked up to, and some of them being based here in LA. And then we got to do some local events. And from there, you build a repertoire, you build sort of a connection and like an energetic conversation that happens. And then you ask, like, hey, can you come do these dates with me? Javi, for example, who's the person I play keys with a lot. I knew him many, many years before in a totally different capacity. And it just so happened that he was based in LA. And when I was looking for people to play with, folks mentioned him, and I was like, whoa, really? He's out here? And then, one thing leads to the next. It's like word of mouth. A lot of the people I end up playing with on tour is based off of relationships and word of mouth. It's really like grassroots organizing at its finest, because you just have to, you have to use the resources available to you and figure out, and really tap into community and be like, hey, who do you think would play great with this? Or who do you know and who's free and who's available? And what do they think about this? And how do they play? And what's their energy? Are they capable of taking leadership? Like, from a woman, is that even, there's just so many things that you have to navigate and learn, because jazz and just music and the world is very much predominantly controlled, or at least led by men. And so it's a very different thing to learn, and different skill sets to have to develop in yourself to be confident enough to take the lead, because there's a lot of, as a poet, I'm not the most classically trained musician. And although what I do is musical, there is a lot that I've had to learn about myself as a musician and as an artist, and to gain the confidence to, make certain demands of the musicians or asks in order to make the collaboration fruitful and important, because it's a totally different thing than just me singing or me just playing and jamming and rocking out with them and improvising. Because the words, though they're musical, they also have meaning and content and substance all in themselves. And finding people who know how to hold space for that, and not afraid to push, and to stretch and to grow, and to like know where we can develop new energies and new sounds and new approaches to things. I think it's exciting to be able to find collaborators who know how to do that.
And I think it's fun to put yourself in those different seats, as you said, as a poet, but essentially you're creative.
Yeah.
And you can take that creativity to a different medium. So you might not be classically trained, but if you're being yourself, then that will reveal itself with the music that you make, or the music that you direct or conduct, and even the people that you choose is a part of that creativity.
Yeah. It's really cool too, that because you said, like it's different to be than just being like a poet by yourself. I think the other part of it is that you can get so isolated in your own head at times when I'm sure when you're just making art yourself, For me, I'm maybe unusual in certain regard to like most poets or most artists, in the sense that I really thrive off of community and collaboration, connection. And so I've always been super excited about poetry, open mics and venues and clubs and cafes and moments where there's jam sessions or open mics, and where people can gather and be like, oh man, you heard that line, or whoa, you see how she sang, or, there's just this energy that you feed off of each other, where you recognize that you're in conversation with other beings and it's not just you. And I think that that's always exciting because it strengthens me. It develops me as an artist, as a poet. And I get so excited. Like if I see you drawing and, your passion and your authenticity and audacity, it makes me look at my art form in a different way, and I can see the poetry in other artists and how they approach. And I think we always say poetry is the metric of one's effectiveness at their art. And so if you draw like a poet, or if you dance like a poet, or if you sing like a poet, at some point, if I say that, you know what I mean. It means that you're taking the craft, you're elevating it in a different way, and the language becomes more profound, It's not just literal anymore.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And so when you're performing, the album and you're taking that on tour, are you leaving in space to improvise in those moments? Or is it like, this is the album, we're going to, have this amount of songs and then we play these songs in different venues? Like, what's that look like?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's mostly improvised. There is the structure, the main chord structure of the songs that we try to stick to so people can feel excited when they recognize a song, like that there are elements that the audience can recognize of the song. But for the most part, honestly, I want to even improvise more. And that's why I've been trying to find the musicians that would be like a stationary sort of band that feel confident, are not like threatened by the process, are super able to be gracious and humble with the craft and what we're doing, because at a certain point, even though I'm the visible, headliner or band leader, so to speak, you're trying to get out of the way, and it's what I found is that that's part of the frustration and the struggle with being an artist in a capitalist like Western society, is that people assume individualism because there is a name. And I think it's been really, I just saw the Sly Stone documentary, which is really beautiful. And I think the thing that he showed with his band was that it was Sly and the Family Stone, and he was trying to make it the most inclusive, process, that even though he was the one that probably had a lot of the creative vision, he was always trying to make sure he was naming and acknowledging everyone so that folks could see that it's bigger than just him, the individual, and it's more about the work and the craft and the channeling, so to speak, or the transmutation. So I think for me, that's a huge part for us, is the ability to find a cohesiveness where we feel we can lean into improvisation and we can lean into, discovery and exploration. And I think Lonnie Holly, who's a elder artist who's on the album, and he said something really profound to me, because he was like, he's also a visual artist. So
I love his work.
Yeah, he's so incredible. And so one of the things that his manager was saying was that like they usually try to get a show where he can make money off of like his paintings or exhibition, and that the touring for the band, they never really see that as the place where, because contrary to popular belief, touring is very expensive, and most musicians are lucky if they make any profit, but usually leave tour in the red. And I didn't know that was a common thing, but it is very much the reality for most, especially independent musicians. And so when I talked to his manager and I was like, man, like we're trying to bring a band, but like we can barely fund it, and like making barely enough. And, and they were like, listen, like we don't see touring as the place where we go to make money. It's the place where it's always about experimentation. Like we want to get enough, which is still not ideal.
Yeah.
But they usually are looking at the stage as a place of improvisation and experimentation. And I think that really was inspiring for me to hear and exciting to think about. But then it's hard because when you have some structure to the poems and some message or meaning or content that is, that you're trying to affirm for the audience, I think it is a challenge to find room to kind of experiment and where you can and where you can't without it seeming, out of character or out of element. And I don't freestyle often, but I do love the way that compositions can change when you just go with your gut and go with your spirit, whatever you feel the moment demands. And especially in this last year and all that has been taking place, there's like genocide and extreme poverty, deportations. Like there's so many things that we're facing in a material way that I think you are going to meet with people who are also facing these things and struggling with them. And you don't want to seem naive to the reality, that we're all dealing with this, So it's like some artists are there to entertain and just get you to escape. And I think that's very different than what we do. There's still some, place for letting go and being free and not being so hyper-focused on the issues that are at hand. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's a little tone deaf to be a performing artist at this time and not adhere to what people have to go walk back out to when they leave your show, the world that we all are facing.
Yeah.
And that definitely impacts some of the shows.
I think that's really interesting that, there are people there that are there to entertain, but then there's people that are there to really just kind of shine a light on what's going on to relate to that. And it's also interesting the kind of the misconceptions of some of these things in the sense of I never knew that a lot of artists would go into the red touring because there's that misconception if you're touring, you're making a bunch of money. But it just shows you that extra layer of difficulty it is to take your craft, a calling that you feel like you've been chosen to go and share, but then there's that extra layer of just trying to make that happen and going on tour and figuring out the costs of it or, figuring out how to pay for it, where everyone else just thinks like, oh, you're getting paid,
Yeah, it's the struggle of the artist in the West, which is like, for most of the part, a lot of us who are sincere about why and how we came to the work, we never thought we would make money off of it anyway. And I think that that's the hard part, reality, because many of us are sensitive, sentient creatures that get exploited because whether or not someone cared, we would still be doing this work. And I think sometimes people see that who have, ulterior motives and don't necessarily, and see a way of monopolizing off of the work and not really sustaining and making sure that the people who are producing the work are taken care of and that they have the infrastructure to do so. But it's a problem within our society and our system. It's not like artists are unique in that struggle. I think when you look at the approach and the process of, social care in this society, it's horrendous. You go to Europe, and while Europe is not, the golden glory of anything, I think that because there wasn't the impetus of those countries wasn't with the inequities that we currently have, like people were seen as all men are created equal, and for that intensive purpose, it was all European white men. So they didn't. The way the country started was with this sense of like, okay, everybody here gets this bare minimum treatment of quality of life and access to resources. It wasn't until colonization and obviously there's always been class war, but in terms of the implementation within law to keep people from having access to healthcare or housing or education, et cetera, the foundation of America was slavery and inequity. So our laws were built up in a certain way to think of how to keep certain people out of having access to basic human rights and decency. Whereas like when you go to Europe, there's certain social programs and healthcare and certain things that people have that are built into the fabric of the countries that allows for, our arguments to start on different tiers, so to speak. Like we're still in this country fighting that like healthcare is a right that people should have, Whereas like in other countries, they already believe that that's a right, but they're fighting to think how much taxes people should have access to and who should have access to healthcare and not, you know what I mean? So it's interesting that, as artists, it would be a different situation if at the bare minimum we had certain fundamentals that we knew we're provided, but we're exploited on all facets. So yeah, tour is one of them. What is it? Live Nation, Ticketmaster, all these people that are taking astronomical fees from tickets, and the audience thinks that the artist is getting this money, not realizing that that's just the fee for them to process the ticket. Then there's the fee from the promoter. Then there's the fee from the venue that gets taken off. So by the time it gets to the artist and what the artist is able to get, I mean, sometimes, you're lucky if you're able to just pay your band, not to mention lodging, food, travel. So I know many artists who left tour in debt and had to literally get, and then there are artists who just say, I can't tour. There's many artists in the last several years, if you look at their announcements for touring, they started with an announcement, and then maybe in a few weeks they're like, hey, after looking at the numbers, we can't do this, and we apologize, and it's really an issue. If James Blake is on the internet talking about, I need to find an alternative to the program, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And these are huge musicians, then imagine the everyday local musician who's just trying to.
And it's interesting from a visual art perspective, people are like, oh, you're in a gallery, but then they don't realize the gallery's taking 50%, sometimes more. And then with your 50%, you're paying, your taxes from that. And then your staff, your time, your insurance, your travel, your studio. And then beyond that, there's not that much. Unless you're with a gallery where you're selling stuff for, 6-7 figures, then that might be a different story. But still, like, the numbers don't really add up.
Well, the visual art world is just disgusting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how y'all do it, but I mean, all of it is gross what they've done to exploit what should be just, I think, I don't know. The whole process is horrible. The industry of it is horrific. And I think that is really a testament to how greedy and just nasty the wealthy can be, and how they see what we do, that they actually don't see and don't truly value it beyond what transaction can be made. But I've just heard horrible things about, because you sell it for a certain price, and then there's no guarantee it won't go on a secondary market. And then what happens there? And, a lot of artists don't ever see. I think it was Kerry James Marshall who sold his painting, got sold for like millions of dollars, I think, to Diddy. And that painting originally sold for something like a tiny percentage of that amount. And yeah, granted, his other paintings may all go up now, but he was making.
It becomes a stock, and people, and also work just doesn't sell on the secondary market just like that for a high figure, without orchestration going on in the background and people selling it to each other over a period of time to increase the market value so that their stock kind of goes up, So there's that whole fun and games to it. But I'd love to know, like, what was your first introduction to poetry?
If we talk about like the literal form of a poem on a page, it would be in elementary school. I was really fascinated by language and just how people expressed and could communicate emotion and evoke like feelings through language and through communication. And I think the first poet I remember ever seeing on the page and being intrigued by like what he was doing with language was Langston Hughes. Then there was like Maya Angelou. But if I were to say, I think the introduction to poetry came definitely in the spiritual elements of family and like familial conversations and familial spiritual experiences. Some of that being in the tradition of the church, and a lot of it being in sort of the non-traditional gatherings in the house. My grandmother was a santera. She, came from Cuba and raised her children in Brooklyn, New York. And my grandfather was Jamaican, and he passed away when my mom was very, very young. But there were certain elements of just the way that they talked to each other about life, the humor in it, the intensity and the depth and sort of the metaphor and rhyme and rhythm and tone, all in the language, that I think was my first love affair with, poetry, so to speak. And I think once I went to church and I remember seeing a preacher like preach for the first time, I knew that there was something about what he was taking from scripture and how he was able to communicate a new meaning, to people through the language that I was like, I want to something about that. Like the way it makes your arms and your hands, and the hair on your arms stand up, the way that you feel not just like they're talking to you, but that the word has come alive, so to speak. I think that is a big part of maybe where I was first inspired.
What was it like for you growing up in New York, in Brooklyn?
It was great. There's a poem by Nikki Giovanni that is called Nikki Rosa. And, how some people will like talk about how bad it was us growing up in the hood or whatever people think. All the while we were quite happy. And I think the thing that I'm remembering now is, kids don't really know much else than what they are born into. And it's only until you see other ways of living and you're compared to something outside of yourself that you start to contemplate, you become self-aware and start to wonder and ask questions about your own upbringing. But for the most part, I think summer times in Brooklyn as a kid was some of the most special, unique, magical, whimsical, cerebral experiences of my life. Just being able to hop fences and climb trees and, be in public parks and sprinklers and ice cream trucks and fire hydrants and the sound of the train coming in on the train station or the bus, wheezing down the street, or just the music of New York is so powerful. It's such the orchestra of sound and images, and you're just constantly stimulated and constantly witnessing and bearing witness to stories unfolding and unraveling around you. And so it is so beautiful for a kid because you just, you don't really need to read picture books. It's just like every day is its own, you're flipping the pages of growing up in the city. And of course, there's stuff that kids in other communities or other neighborhoods might think are too grown to experience. But I think that I feel grateful that I didn't feel like I was sheltered from the world in a way that made it so that I couldn't be prepared for what was to come, and to know that I had to have my wits about me and I had to be aware of different types of people and how to read certain types of people. And I always say, sitting with my grandmother on the front porch in Brooklyn, only now that I learned, it was such a huge lesson for me and spiritual kind of grounding to learn how to read people and learn how to read experiences and different kinds of characters, so that as I got older, I just learned how to navigate personalities, And I think that that's a privilege growing up in New York City to be able to have that, because I don't think the kids these days even have the same level of, I want to say, freedom and carelessness that we had, because we were allowed to be roaming the streets. It was like I was 7 or 8 years old, just out on the streets with my friends. And I started taking the train by myself when I was 10, from Brooklyn to the city to my elementary school. And so now I don't know how the hell they allowed me to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm thinking about it, like, I would be terrified to put a 10-year-old on the train right now by themselves. But like, I was terrified the first time I ever took the train by myself. But just because I was terrified, I was going to take the wrong train. And once I started taking the train and really getting my way around, it gave me a sense of independence at such a young age that I really am grateful that I had. I don't think you really understand the power of that until you're a lot older. But it taught me so much about, just how to handle the world and how to move in the world with a sense of awareness.
There's so many beautiful visuals there. And I love the unspoken language of the porch or a stoop.
Yeah.
And the characters that you nod or you say hi or you wave or you ignore them or, just like you say, that that street smart of just kind of learning those unspoken rules is really, really interesting to think about.
Yeah. It's
Well-
funny now that I talk so much because when I was a kid, I didn't. I think that's probably why I have so much in me because like my grandma she had such a boisterous, loud like presence and personality, and my mother, everybody in my family. So they would always be talking so you just always was overhearing things and eavesdropping on stuff you probably shouldn't have known or, should have known and whatever. And I think that, what else was I to become after having all that poured into me?
So what was your school like? So you went to elementary school in the city?
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of what was your trajectory from there to high school to elsewhere?
Mostly, the thing about New York City, at least then when we were growing up, is like once you get into one district, you can stay in that district and sort of move around regardless of where you move in your neighborhood. And my mom was working as an assistant to a doctor's office in the Upper East Side. So she got me into a school that was down the street from the doctor's office. And because she would see these kids in this school when she would get on her lunch break, she really wanted me to go to school there instead of where we were living in Brooklyn. And so she kind of like went out of her way to find the information. The superintendent like looked it up. The woman who was there, who ended up being the principal, was like on leave from being a superintendent, like took a liking to my mom, knew that she was kind of struggling as a single mom to take care of us, and gave her sort of the scoop on how to get us into the district. So she used her like doctor's office address, got us into the school district. And once we got into that district, we were able to kind of stay in that school district, which was very good. It was District 2, which was a very good school district, public school district. And so from elementary school, I went to one of the best elementary schools with some of the greatest teachers. They were all very sensitive, aware, emotionally intelligent, present, dedicated, devoted teachers, young, probably right out of school, most of the teachers that we had. Some of them were older, but like they were just very devoted and dedicated. I just remember I feel very privileged to have had some of the type of educators that I've had over the years because they never let you slack and they really wanted the best for you and they were passionate about what they were teaching. And so it made you be like, even if you don't like the subject, you were entertained to some degree. And so then I went to middle school. My elementary school was in like 66th Street or so, PS 23. And then I went to Eastside Middle. Then I went to Baruch. It's a magnet school. And then I went to college. And my college was a college called Sarah Lawrence College. It's a liberal arts school, very artsy-fartsy.
Also in New York?
Yeah, it was it's like more in this area called Bronxville, which is like Westchester. It's like right outside of the Bronx, North Yonkers area. And it's, it's a cool little liberal arts school, very expensive, very bougie, but, it's all, the way that we used to describe it or like think of it is that it was all the rich kids, the rebel rich kids, kids of rich people, like, the ones that didn't fit in, didn't do what their dad wanted them to do, were trying to be like sort of avant-garde and because the school was astronomically expensive, before even school was as expensive as it is now. It was always expensive. It was always more expensive than other schools. And it's a small liberal arts school, so people really have a very unique, I want to say like curated experience for your own expertise or passion. It's very unusual, especially at the time. Now it's more common to have these sort of experimental school, liberal arts schools. But at the time, it was very avant-garde in the sense that you didn't have exams or, tests. You interview your professors before you take them. You only take 3 courses a semester, and usually in a field that you want to do, you do a research paper at the end, and anything you want to research in that field. And so it was really for people that are very aware and person-minded, like individual-minded about their own drives and passions, and a lot of obscure, strange things that people would write essays and study about, But they, as long as they could write a research paper about it and have their citations right, then they would be great. And it was a really awesome education because I think I got exposed to so many different types of personalities, interests, inquiries, and the approach to education was very, very unique. So I took a lot of really random courses.
Do you remember some of the topics of things that you researched there?
I was really into like religion and faith. I really wanted to understand faith and religion because I was at a certain point in my life super religious, and I was really intrigued by different types of faiths. So I took, Muslim thought courses, Judaism courses, like Christianity courses in different faiths. Philosophy, I took a few philosophy courses, which were really exciting at an art school, like just to be thinking deeply and asking questions I never asked before. There was an incredible class that I took that changed my entire life, which is by this professor, Marvin Frankel, and the class was called The Talking Cure, ironically. He would have loved podcasts had he been around long enough to... He passed away several years ago, but he was just brilliant, and there was a psychology course that was really about the role of, psychotherapy in our society and how it shapes who we become and our ideas about ourselves and our ways forward. So that was really great. I took theater courses, playwriting courses, all types of stuff. Poetry, some really amazing poetry courses. There was a poet, Jeffrey McDaniel, who I love, and had a lot of great time learning and sitting with him and editing poems. Kamosi Woodard, who did this incredible class that like brought movement and how we think about movement and the Black arts movement into, society and arts and social justice, and just thinking about Amiri Baraka and his role in our movement. So that was great to study with him. But it was a lot of the stuff out of class that was really interesting too,
What kind of stuff was out of class?
Well, people didn't really have parties, but they thought they were parties. It was a small liberal arts school, so there was like no real sororities or fraternities or anything like that. But I got to meet some of my closest friends at random dorm room parties or just like situations that you end up in. You're like, how did I get here? I got to see cool musicians come and perform and do shows, and just weirdo artists walking the halls and the street and the campus, just crazy outfits and strange performance theater stuff down the campus lawn, or, you just would see really eclectic people. You just, as a Black artist, you have your apprehensions and your judgments about it. You're like, okay, these white people are crazy. But, then there's also just like, you realize what it's like for certain communities of folks to be allowed and encouraged to fully express themselves and to be artists and to like that to be taken seriously. I think there was art everywhere on campus, and art was like integrated into everything. And it was so amazing and so rich with that you couldn't possibly have enough time to like do all the things you wanted to do. And that's the thing that I think about often is like the person I am now, what I would enjoy, how amazing it would be to go back to school now because I actually know myself better, and I would probably take advantage of things so much more than I did because I was, you're young, you're just still figuring it out, and you take for granted that like you're in a place where everybody's just working on trying to better their craft or figure out or do these things with this time that they have. And sometimes you're just so busy trying to survive and make sure you're scholarship works and that your rent is paid, that you have your meal plan, that you like don't even think about the privilege it is to be, to just have space and time to float and create and research and make mistakes and see other people making genius art,
Yeah, hearing you describe what college was like, it makes me feel like I want to go back to school.
Yeah, I would encourage low-key, we all need to go back to school. Clearly, because the state of the world looks like we don't know what we're doing.
So you mentioned that your relationship to faith has evolved and changed. What has that looked like? Where are you now with that?
I'm in a place of just immense gratitude for age and like having lived long enough to learn some lessons. I think I was very, very stubborn and, like most young people, just a bit self-righteous about what I thought I knew, or what I believed was the path or the way. And I think that I look back at like young Aja with so much grace and so much compassion, because my relationship to faith at that time was so necessary for me to survive what I was experiencing and going through with my family and my home and my upbringing. And it kept me grounded and disciplined in a way that I needed. And so I give thanks for the awareness and the ability to have had faith and have had a relationship, a pretty deep, profound relationship with God at that time. And I think Christianity or whatever, big R religion that was the path to that was necessary. I think the thing that I have maybe not regrets, or at least just compassion for now, and teaches me so much about the path that I'm want to take, or the path that I needed to take to get to where I am now, is that I think I resent and I ache for so many young people who are brought into and indoctrinated into certain religious faiths and paths under the assumption that their way is the way and the only way and the righteous path. And because of that, inflict harm or pain or judgment on others, because of the limited belief system or the need to have a belief system to survive, and the fear of that being threatened, being a threat to your survival or to your livelihood, whatever it may be that people feel. I'm grateful that I lived long enough to grow from that place, to have fallen in love with other faiths and other passionate paths toward spiritual oneness, awareness. My grandmother was a santera, and so I think that was always the undercurrent of my experience, that I knew that there were other ways of experiencing the spirit's eye or the spirit's heart, that there's what we say and what we see and what we think we know, and then there are other paths to that self-discovery, to that unknowing, to that place of the unlanguageable, and to that spiritual place of gratitude and presence. And I'm grateful for the travels and the places that poetry has taken me, and the friendships and the relationships that I've had, and the different sorts of scripture and art that has opened and expanded my heart and my mind to other ways of like experiencing the allness of being, the allness of existing, the everness of here. And I feel really grateful for just time and space. I'm so glad that I didn't, leave this planet at other iterations of Aja. Because the love I feel in my heart is so much more expansive than I could have ever known. And at that time, I thought that was all there was, It's just like when you think the world is flat, you know what I mean, or something. Like, it's like, I'm so glad that I'm not there. Not that I thought the world was flat, but, just when you find out that whatever you thought you were so convicted in, when you get to a place where you can examine your convictions and you have grace and compassion with yourself, to allow for that examination to happen. I'm so grateful, and I can't even imagine where I'll be in more time.
Yeah.
And the relationship I have, my grandmother passed away last year, and she's the matriarch of our family and was probably the most mythical, magical, mystical person in my life. And I never thought I would, just being in this place where I have outlived her, I could have never envisioned what that time would be like and who I would be and what it would look and feel like. And so to be on the other side of that and to have a different relationship with her now has been extremely profound. And meditation has been a huge part of my practice now, I think.
Yeah.
There's so much that I appreciate. I have so much more grace for the things that can't be communicated. Whereas I think in my younger years, even recently, like just you can get so caught up with the need to articulate and express what is going on within, and you can feel at times strangled by the inability to express. But I think I've come to a place where I've accepted that there's this profound, massive, expansive experience within that like no one else may ever understand, or I may never be able to communicate. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's cool.
There's something really beautiful about age. Not only are you learning, but you're unlearning. And I love that idea of, your relationship with your grandmother continues. And my grandmother was the closest person I was to in my family. And so when she passed, that was kind of a big shock. But then I realized that relationship continues. And she often appears on a bench in my dream. And, we just sit there. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. But, that relationship will always continue, which is so beautiful.
Yeah. I'm grateful I hope I get to experience old age,
Yeah.
I hope I do. And if I do, if I don't, that's fine. Whatever's written is written for my path. But I do enjoy aging, especially as a person that identifies as a woman. I think that there's just so much judgment that you have when you're growing up, and like insecurity about just things in life that's projected onto you. And it's nice to like get to a place where, because when you're young in Western society, it's like getting older is seen as like this negative thing, especially for women. And I'm just like, please, like this is, because I don't want to go back to
Yeah.
like, I don't 20s, what, teen? No. It was great while it lasted, but the person that I'm becoming, I'm falling in love with every day, because I get another chance to like better myself and grow and learn and meet people and be transformed and still have hope that something else will come different.
Yeah.
Because I once thought I knew what was coming and I realized I don't. So the awe, you have to kind of open yourself up to the suspense and awe of like not knowing what's coming. And that's kind of cool,
And it's always changing. You're changing. Your body's changing. The scenery's changing. Relationships are changing. Everything's changing.
Yeah, the body part changing is not always, the aches and different things happening to your body. That's the thing I wish more people who identified as women would like disclose to each other.
Yeah.
As we get older, I think there are certain societies that have those rites of passages and certain rituals and experiences where this is what it is to come of age in this moment and this moment. And I just wish that we had some of those things, because there's a lot of stuff I'm like, what's going on? And then you talk to another woman like, oh yeah, that's normal. That happened to me when I was.
But people don't talk about them. Like, tell us, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much happening in women's bodies right now that like is not normal though. So that's, because of the food and the hormones and stuff, like there's a lot that people think is like just them experiencing.
Yeah.
Like something's wrong with just them, and not realizing, no, there is a society and a world that is like normalized not taken care of.
Yeah. And I think for the first time, women are actually starting to talk about that. And then, like you said, we're all like, wait, that's happening to you? That's happening to me. You know, I thought I was the only one. And so I'm thankful for these platforms where people can share that information.
Fibroids, that was never a thing when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Women were never, I don't remember women ever talking about fibroids.
They didn't.
No. Fibroid, cysts, like just so many things, you know. Yeah, so I'm just grateful for the space to age and to learn. And hopefully, you know, God is gracious that it comes with grace, you know.
So finishing college, tell us a little bit about that path that you've walked from there till now.
Oh, girl.
maybe some highlights, because a lot have happened since then.
Yeah, so much. I mean, I went to grad school, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which was very artsy, fartsy, interdisciplinary school. I was always trying to be around artists in a way that allowed me to approach my art form differently. And so I liked the idea of being in a school where it was focused on interdisciplinary, because poetry to me wasn't just like this rigid on the page thing, but that I wanted to be around other people whose minds were open enough to like bend and break and experiment with rules. And I think going to art school helped. And I loved going to School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I took some incredible classes. Actually, another professor who I love, who changed my life, passed away very recently, Craig Harshaw. And he taught this class that was about like social justice for art workers, and the material that he had us read and the things he had us study like opened and expanded my mind so much. Then I took like a sound class with this guy, Nicholas Collins, who's crazy experiment. He makes these crazy like sound machines and electronic experiments with sound. And that was so cool to like take a sound class with somebody at an art school and like learn about that. I tried to take a painting class. That didn't last very long, but it was very eye-opening for me. Took a curation class once. I took poetry classes, of course. So that was really helpful. And in the time of doing that, I was also involved in a lot of teaching of young people and mentoring and being in the sort of music scene of Chicago and meeting a lot of musicians and artists and getting involved. And I organized this huge benefit where we brought all these artists together, raised money for the earthquake in Haiti. And I got really close to some musicians that then grew up and became huge, well-known musicians. And those relationships took new forms and shapes and transformed and grew over the years, became people who I collaborated with and did work with up until even this day. And then where did I go? I went to Saul Williams, who's a poet that is a really great friend and mentor of mine. He was living in Paris at a certain time that I was in grad school, and I was staying actually with his family in Chicago. And he invited me to Paris, and I had never gone abroad, even though I had wanted to. And so his invitation was like my first real time getting to spend some time abroad. And we developed like this concept when I went to visit him around doing this kind of literary mixtape. And we edited this anthology together. It did really well and got all these incredible poets published. And then I just kind of explored traveling for a bit, and influenced me very, very much in terms of just my worldview, my politics. I became super politicized being abroad, just seeing America from afar. And I went through this horrible situation where I had like horrible toothache. Long story short, didn't have health insurance, et cetera. Ended up that same week hearing a horrible story about someone who died from like not being able to afford to get their tooth taken care of, and paid for antibiotics instead. And so the infection grew, went to their brain. And I was like flipping out about this because it was in the news. And I was in Europe, ended up in Paris, ended up getting connected to a dentist, went to the dentist, got everything taken care of for like €80. And it just super politicized me, made me so angry. I was just like, what? You mean to tell me we could be getting,
It's the healthcare is criminal.
It's horrible. It's really, really horrible. And it's also horrible because of what it does to your psyche and your emotional reality. Like, when you're not well or something's not good in your body, like it's already hard enough to just face that and confront it and to address it head on, to not hide it, to not like feel like you got, you're a leper or something's wrong with you. That's already like so much psychologically, emotionally. Then to think about just having to figure out paying for it and affording it, affording being sick. That's just it's horrible. It's horrific. And so the many levels and layers of how people in America have to navigate the, emotional lack of well-being because of our healthcare system, the psychological, emotional realities of that. I mean, it's horrendous, and something's got to give. It has to change. It must shift. So that was a big moment for me. And when I came back to the States, I was super involved, politically involved. I was teaching young people in public schools in New York City at a certain point, teaching poetry, trying to figure out my life. I had like no money. I was trying to figure out what to do. And I got back to just organizing my own poetry readings and doing my own, gigs, really renting out a venue and doing it myself. I met my friend Daphne when I was in Europe, and she's the one that got me back to doing poetry because at a certain point I was going to give it up. I didn't even really want to do it anymore. I felt like giving up. So from that, I think, it became just like gig after opportunity, after person, after relationship, I met Hank Willis Thomas when I was living abroad in Paris at the same time he was doing a residency. And so we got close and cool then. And I didn't really even know much about him or his family, but his mom was organizing the Black Portraiters Conference. That's another thing. Yeah, I forgot about that. But was organizing the Black Portraiters Conference, and one of the people who was working with her was a friend of mine, Sonia, and she recommended me for that conference. And I did a presentation, performance, talk thing, and Carrie Mae Weems was in the audience. And I met so many different visual artists at that conference. And ironically, Carrie Mae Weems' Kitchen Table series was a piece that I saw for the first time when I went to the art museum in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute. One day I was like in a horrible, horrible personal experience that I went through. And I went to the museum to try to like just lift my spirits or something. And as soon as I walked in, I've never forget it, like saw like a Joseph Cornell boxes, and I kind of wrote this poem inspired by them. And then I went to this other room and I walk in and I see this Black woman on the wall, her portraits, and these like words that were like poems. And I'm like, whoa, poetry could be in an art museum, let alone like this Black woman's here. Like, this is huge. And so I fell in love with her work. And that was, years prior. And then fast forward, I'm in Paris and, I do this presentation. I get off the stage. This woman comes up to me and she's like, I loved everything you had to say. Oh, darling, it was great. It was so amazing. And then I leave it alone. I'm like, okay, cool. And we go to like the after little shindig. And my friend comes up to me, Sonia Lewis, and she's like, did you meet Carrie Mae Weems? And I said, no, she's here. And she's like, yeah, she's right there. And she goes up and walks up to her to introduce it. I'm like, that's Carrie Mae Weems? And she's like, yeah. I was like, she came up to me. She came up to me after I spoke. And I was just so stoked because I didn't know who she was. And it was so sweet. It was like a very serendipitous, beautiful moment. And ironically, that's so deep because now that I'm telling you, I'm like, all this stuff is flashing back. But after that, she took my email, or no, she didn't even take my email. We just connected. She reached out to Deb Willis to get my email for an event that she was doing at the Guggenheim. And that was her retrospective, her first retrospective. And I had just decided to go back to the States like a few months prior. And it changed my world because, it brought my poetry into a different place. Like I was doing so many things already. I was teaching, I was doing the gigs, I was doing the little underground poetry scene in New York. I was going to the theater spaces, the community centers, et cetera. But then to be invited into like the art world was so unique. And the Guggenheim of all places, like I remember going there as this little kid on a school visit, so then to perform there. And what she did with her retrospective was so powerful because she made a weekend-long event of all of these incredible artists and thinkers and dancers and musicians. I remember I met Jason Moran there. I met, I saw old friends, Camille A. Brown, who I worked with years ago, incredible choreographer. So many dots connected. And one thing led to another. She asked me to do another gig with her. I met other people they asked me to do. So it kind of just, it's all been very grassroots, just like one dot leads to the next dot, which leads to the next dot. And you just keep going. You keep your head up. You keep hope alive, and you keep consistent and devoted and committed to the thing you're doing. And thankfully, people kept calling me, kept asking me to come do one thing, the next thing. And, it's so many moments that led to the moment I'm in now. So many random experiences, but I'm just grateful for every opportunity I've had to connect deeply and collaborate intentionally with other artists, because those are the places that have really sparked, my imagination of what poetry could do or where poetry could live and how it could show up. And it's taken me outside of my own constraints,
I love the visual, like there's all these dots, and these dots are constellations, but they don't connect themselves. You need to connect them with that consistency, with that hard work, by putting one foot in front of the other.
Yes.
And then you connect those dots.
Yeah, which is like what led me to meet you, because had I not met like Hank that way, and then Deb Willis, and then Carrie, and then, that relationship grow and develop, I wouldn't have known about like Four Freedoms and have the relationship I have now with Hank, who I love and who's a dear, friend, and then learn, about Lyndon and like all these other amazing artists, like that I've been able to literally consider like basically family at this point, and now talking to you as you look back, you're like, oh wow, that was all just like so orchestrated, lovely, you know? But when you're in it, you're walking blindly with your hands in front of you, like, just like, if I stay committed to this thing, hopefully it'll. But there were so many days I sat with Hank. I remember, like, you know, Hank to me was like, I was so inspired by him and so like inspired by his family and everything. And I remember like being so broke, I could barely afford like lunch or dinner. And he would, you know, be like, oh, come on, I'll take you out for dinner or something. And I'll just be talking to him like, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't know what I'm doing, you know. And he just would keep me encouraged and keep me like, you know, just affirming the path, you know. And it's so beautiful when you have angels who you come across in your life that affirm and water the seeds and, you know, that you planted and remind you like, keep going, you know, keep going, keep going. And there's so many moments that has happened where I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this thing is worth doing. You know? Don't give up yet.
And I can relate to that, like feeling lost, but then you look back at the constellations and the dots and it all makes sense. And we got to create that beautiful collaboration together with Lyndon, which was really incredible for Freedoms. Yeah. So that was a fun project.
I love that Four Freedoms does that too, that they're really great at just connecting dots and finding ways to bring artists together to have an initiative or a goal and accomplish something that we all can get behind, you know, and rally around, and to realize that our art does have power and it has agency when we come together. But it's just great to have community, when it can be very easy to feel isolated and individualistic. And like you said, I think the poet and many times the artist, the idea is that you're off in your studio by yourself, you're in some cabin or some residency, and to always be reminded that you're not alone, that you are part of an ecosystem of other incredible people putting their head down, chipping away at the thing that they're trying to, that they're really obsessed with, possessed by, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like an obsession, and it's actually really beautiful, but it's also a little, how do I say, intense,
Yeah.
Like, why do you need to do this? Like, why do you need to sit there with, a pen and like dots and just keep going at that one little page forever? Or why do you need to keep your paintbrush going? Or why do you need the markers and your hand just keeps trailing? It's like, you don't know what it is, but something's calling forth within and throughout you. And it only makes sense when you answer that calling,
And I'm obsessed with that question as well of like, what is the point of making art? Why do we do this? Why don't we do something else? How did we end up here? Who is it for? Is it for us?
Do you feel that way?
I feel that way, and I often feel like it's a calling. It's in me. Like I don't really have a choice. I've tried to take other paths, but I always end up here. And I think having these conversations for me is almost like pulling a mirror up to see what reflects back. And when that reflects back, then I get re-inspired to be like, oh, this is why I'm making, this is why I'm here, this is why I'm creating, this is why I'm me, this is why I was born into this circumstance or family or class or race or all of those things. It's because I'm meant to be me. I'm meant to be an artist. And so with that, I'd love to ask you, what is the point of making art?
Oh. I don't know if there's a point to be had or to be made. I think it's just, it's not about you. It's to your point. I think there's like, you don't have a choice. There's something that, it comes from elsewhere. I don't think it's like it's not a conscientious, completely transparent, articulate, fully expressed, coherent thing. I don't think art is literally in the incoherent realm. If I feel like that's where it invites people into that incoherence and to explore and expand on what can't be shared and what can't be explored and what can't. Because I think about it in the sense that the poem is nice, the painting, the picture, the portrait, the bottle, the watch, whatever it may be. That's nice for people to have and to leave with as an archive of the process. But the process is really where it's at, And I think that's the part that I struggle with, is that the poem never lives up to the process. I always feel inadequate. I always feel like what I'm sharing with people is not actually the thing, It's not actually the most profound thing about what I do. And that's the hardest part, is that people get caught up in the product and the experience they have of what they think you do. And they don't realize that it's all about the process. So I feel like maybe that's the point, is that there is no point. The point is the process.
It's the doing, it's the process. I relate to that so much. As we close up, what's around the corner from you? Like what's coming up?
Well, thank you for getting me to ramble this long.
No, this has been so beautiful. And I thank you for sharing your voice and your story here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I just you realize how much you scratch at trying to articulate things. And it's really sweet when people get to ask you about yourself and stuff that you haven't talked about in a while. So I'm like, oh, wow, I really haven't thought about that in a long time and how much that has impacted me. But in terms of what's next, I have a book of poetry that's coming out in June, on June 3rd. It's called Florida Water. And the Four Freedoms poem is in there, actually. It's a lot of the stuff, because all of the stuff that I've been working on or organizing or creating around, and the poems that I wrote in the time that I was living in Florida are all in that book. And so it's sort of a compilation of some things that are very old, some things that are a little newer, but it's just stuff I need to release and get out in a book, and people have it and they can read it on their own, so I can move on to the next thing, because people will be like, where can I find this poem or where can I find that? And they're not all somewhere for folks to get. So Florida Water will be out, and I'm really grateful for that to be in the world. And beyond that, I'm trying to spend time home. I'm doing some collage and some other sound. I'm working with some sound stuff for my own personal sound healing and stuff like that, for my own personal well-being, and hopefully the next album, whenever.
Love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your beautiful, powerful voice today.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of What's the Point? Recorded at Spotify Studios in Los Angeles. Check out our website, made by Eat.studio. Grant Alexander Peters does our theme music, engineering, and editing. Research and pre-show preparation are done by Vern Molidor and Joyce Adams-So from the Shantell Martin studio team. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a nice 5-star review. Don't forget to check out the show description for more information on today's guest. And you can follow myself and the podcast on Instagram at Shantell_Martin. What's the point? Don't you open that door. Don't you open, don't you want some more? Don't you open that trap door? Don't you open some more? Open a door, open a trap door, open yourself and open some more.